This evening, we're going to have a special guest, Brad Scott, who has been a mentor of mine when it comes to this language, and I've learned so much from him, and I appreciate him taking the time to come and fellowship with us this evening and kind of touch on his views concerning the Hebraic mind versus the Greek mind, and as well as touch bases on a couple of the books that he's written. Many of you that have taken the class, our Hebrew 101 class, know that I have you start out with this book written by Brad, Let This Mind Be in You. And also I want to have him touch on the principle of the seed. And he has a website at www.wildbranch.org, and you can find these books on his website there. And so Brad, thank you for being with us this evening. And I'd like to start off by letting you kind of give a little bit of background, where you came from, what denomination you were in when you came to the knowledge of the truth in the Hebrew roots.
Well, thank you. It really is a pleasure to be with you all this day after Thanksgiving here. So anything can happen in this room. This is my office, and even though all the company and all the people who are with me are in another room, but they I don't know, they may just forget and burst in at any moment. So be prepared for chaos to ensue. What's happening here, but. Appreciate it, Teddy. For those of you out here, I've known Teddy for quite a few years now, and I've seen him go from, just getting started, just kind of nowhere yet, to where he's at now, and I think he's certainly a messenger of Yahweh, and so I do want to say something about you as well, Teddy. Getting to the background, I was raised in a Lutheran church. I was raised in traditional non-evangelical churches. I was not raised in evangelical. I wasn't evangelical till later on in my life, but I went through the Methodist church with my parents. I did all the usual things. It was confirmed. The Lutherans was the altar boy, the protesting Catholic Lutheran kind of church kind of thing, and with the candle lighting and all that kind of stuff. And so I grew up not in a non-evangelical atmosphere. And while I was trying to be a rock star down in Nashville some years back, I was introduced to a Pentecostal. I went to church with a guy I knew in high school. It was a Pentecostal kind of church, and I really things dramatically changed right there in my life. Things became more action oriented. So there was a process, Teddy. It wasn't just one day reading something by Dr. Marvin Wilson, who was a mentor of mine. Some of you are familiar with his work. It wasn't just an epiphany. I didn't sit out in a field naked contemplating my belly button or any of those kind of things, and while these revelations came in or whatever. It was a lot of, and you probably know what I'm saying, it was just a lot of hard work. But there were some catalysts for these things, and as I was back in 1981, 1982 is when I first got involved in what we now call Hebrew Roots. It wasn't called Hebrew Roots in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. It was just some form of them under the Messianic umbrella. And during that process, I had some mentors of mine who now write things against me. And so you probably know who I'm talking about. Some of the Messianic Jewish organizations, these men were men that I revered, and some of them I still do. And now I'm their enemy. They're not my enemy, but I'm their enemy. And so are you, and things of that nature. And so I learned from them. I learned all these things. And that's when I learned that just because you are Jewish and you believe in the Messiah doesn't mean that you are not part of Christianity. Now, I'm giving their view. That was their view back then. They were trying to make some headways into nominal Christianity, and they were being rejected. Why were they being rejected? Because they were still keeping the Sabbath and they were still observing the feast. So therefore, they were rejected. And so they spent decades trying to show them that if you read the New Testament very carefully, nowhere in the New Testament does it ever say that just because you're Jewish and you believe in the Messiah means that you're not part. As a matter of fact, the first 12 disciples, you know the whole story. And as I began to read those things, Teddy, now we're into the 80s. I'm pastoring a local church here, ordained through a non-denominational organization out of Arizona or New Mexico. And so I'm co-pastoring a local congregation. I'm learning these things. I'm starting to teach a Hebrew class and started to do listen to Lamb and do messianic dance in our congregation, and everybody was accusing us of being Jewish. You know how that goes. And one day I was actually focusing on a passage in Isaiah, which I've quoted many times, and I bet you have too. Isaiah 46:10. One of six other examples in Isaiah where it tells us that the end is revealed out of the beginning. And the more I looked at that, and the more I looked at it in Hebrew, saying the end was literally out of the beginning. And as I began to ponder these things, I began to think about the reality of that statement. Is that statement true? And the more I began to research these things, the more I began to realize that when I went back to the beginning, I didn't read any theology. You read those opening chapters of Genesis, there's no, quote, theology. Not that that wouldn't be the background for theological propositions, but when you go back and read, there's just the birds and the bees and the flowers and the trees and the moon and above and so on and so forth. There's no similitudes, there's no figures of speech. It's all dirt and clouds and seed. And then I began to investigate a little further, and I began to realize, as I began to search these things out, that all the words in our Bible, and I mean this with all my heart, all the words in our Bible actually have their beginning through this beautiful language as is revealed in the natural things of creation. And that's why all those letters that make up the Hebrew alphabet are all pictures of normal things that people do when they lead normal lives. That their meanings weren't behind guys sitting in high ivory towers with big heads and bad wig toupees and so forth, sitting in high towers, lording things over us. That we've been doing that for 2,000 years, and that hasn't changed anything. So as I began to do that, I got a website back in the early 90s. I don't know when it was in the early 90s, and that's when I began to realize that there were a lot of other people. It wasn't called Hebrew Roots then, it was still called Messianic, and there was a lot of people under that umbrella. And then I began to discover, salt shakers. For those of you out there who have been around a long time, Salt Shakers was a very well-known ministry back then, but they were Messianic Jewish. But that's what you had. And then after a while, discovered Eddie Chumney and people like that. And then I just started getting in. I started writing articles and get invited to speak places, and it just went crazy. Then, I ended up getting a really bad. I started touring nationally in 1997. Then started touring internationally just a few years after that. I got in a bad car wreck and ended up having to leave the job, the secular job that I had, and started doing this full time. And it's been crazy ever since. So that's the background of me, for what it's worth.
Yeah. Before we get off that subject, Brad, how much of a difference did that understanding make in your understanding of the scripture? Whenever you begin, there probably isn't any words, but how, if you, on a scale from 1 to 10, what was the pain level here? How much of a difference did it make in your teaching, brother, and in what you shared with other members of the body?
Well, first of all, for my ministry personally, it became a whole new way of looking at things. As a matter of fact, I think I did every year. I do a different kind of tour wherever I go, and I think for like 5 or 6 years straight, it was that thinking process. This is one of the only few Hebraic roots books. As a matter of fact, I don't know of any other Hebrew roots authors that have their books in with Messianic Jewish resources and Jewish jewels and all. They accept these things because they understand they're not controversial so much as that they're revealing of the difference between the Greek and Hebrew thought.
All right. Well, Brad, I want to thank you, brother, for taking the time to be on the program this evening. May Yahweh bless you and your family. And we look forward to maybe having the opportunity to do something with you in the future. And thank you so very much, brother.
Let's do that. Love you all. Take care.
All right. Shalom.
Bye-bye. Shalom.